of Water and the Spirit, Part 14, Chapters 17 and 18. Chapter 17, In the Arms of the Green Lady. The next day I was ordered to resume my gazing exercise. The others were gone, probably getting on with their initiation. I had not had time to speak to Nyanlali, either after waking up at daybreak or during the more opportune time of breakfast, but just being with him had made me feel better. My friend embodied all that I was trying to become. To be near him was to have a frame of reference for all my confused feelings, and that somehow comforted me. As I took up my position in front of the tree, I noticed that I was not as restless as I had been the day before. I was able to get to work with a relatively quiet mind that took the task at hand seriously. Today, I was more eager to explore the new avenue made available to me by this opportunity. There was, however, a greater number of curious elders watching me than the day before. 4 of the 5 elders had gathered to see me gaze at the yulla tree, as if someone had told them there was an unusual event occurring on the sidelines of the initiation ceremonies. I felt the anxiety of someone who is being monitored stupid, as I had at school when I sinned and was asked to wear the hated goat symbol. I had to show these old men that I could do something. I concentrated my sight on the tree. This, I thought to myself, is a gaze that has substance and meaning. The look in my eyes embodies challenge. I was determined to overcome the opacity of the physical by my commitment to see. By now, I had figured out that I was expected to see something other than the tree itself, something that still was the tree, but uninvented, unmediated, pure. I stared intensely. I was more confident than I had been yesterday, and my level of distraction was minimal. For the first time, I had stopped asking myself questions. There was a goal to reach, and I did not want to continue lagging behind everybody else. So I attacked the tree with the drill of my sight. The sun rose, and with it came the heat. I penetrated the depths of my body, cooking every cell along the way. As I locked onto the tree, the heat locked onto me. The contest was hard, for I did not want to waste another day fighting against the sun and other distractions. I was determined to do better this time. I began by deciding the sun did not exist. Only me and my tree existed in this whole universe. But my denial of the heat became more and more impossible to sustain as the sun got closer and closer to the zenith. To make things worse, some insect decided to bite me on my bare back. Instinctively, I reached back and hit myself very hard. I heard the elders laugh at me, exchange some words, then laugh again. Meanwhile, a large area on my back was getting swollen. I guessed that I had been stung by a bee. Presently, the area needed to be scratched, but I could not afford to do so for fear of being laughed at again. It was apparent that they were enjoying watching me wrestle with my ordeal. I decided I was not going to think about my back either. In the meantime, the sweat that the heat of the sun had forced out of me was dripping slowly down my body, tickling me in sensitive areas. I thought about designing a strategy to diminish thinking about sweat running down my body, but I couldn't do it. It was beyond me. Trying to ignore the sweat only made me think about it more. It also served to irritate the part of my body that had been stung. As if envious of my wandering attention, the pain rose sharply from the area of the bite and drew my hand around to scratch it. The elders noticed this and, as before, murmured to one another. I saw them shake their heads in agreement, then look away from me. I resolved that I would not continue to torture myself for the sake of a tree. Since I could not openly defy the elders, that would have meant the end of me. I would trick them. They expected me to see something, so I would make something up. How would they know I was lying? The understanding of traditional education I had gained from my year in the village had taught me that one was always introduced to the very thing that is part of one's own world. I had also learned that the world of the self in the universe of these elders was autonomous. Knowing meant knowing one's own world as it truly was, not as someone else told you it should be. Wasn't this gazing assignment just one of the many contexts designed by the elders to allow each of us to come to grips with that esoteric universe of the self? I called out to the elders and told them that I was seeing an antelope staring at me. It was gigantic and brownish, with a white line on its side and another between its eyes. I said that it was looking at me as if it intended to hunt me, and I asked them, can a tree become an antelope and vice versa? While speaking, I made sure I never looked their way because I knew they would then detect that something was wrong. I wanted to convey the impression that I was fascinated with this apparition. In so doing, I hoped to increase the credibility of my invention. Their reaction, however, was the opposite of what I had expected. Though I was not looking at them, I could sense the impact of their surprise in the air around me. They all stood up as if shocked. Then the elder who had been my supervisor the day before asked me what else the antelope was doing. I said it was sitting on its hind legs. This time they all burst out laughing and kept laughing for what seemed like a very long time. An antelope sitting on its hind legs? My supervisor said in between laughs. Keep looking. They cackled and gleefully patted one another on the back. When they finally calmed down, one of them said, what did I tell you? This boy is fighting against himself. I can't believe it. This falsehood is not his own invention. He would never have thought of this kind of thing himself. The white men have initiated him into acting this way. He has lived around them too long, and now he has become a liar too. If his void were not stained with white, he would know that this life has no room for lies. I felt as if I had been stabbed. I was ashamed of myself, so much so that I felt the urge to bury myself right on the spot to escape the presence of the elders. How did they know that I had lied? How could I win their trust now that I had so stupidly lost it? All I could do was to pretend I did not hear them. After they had their fill of laughter, they ignored me. Tears insidiously crawled out of my eyes and ran down my face, mixed with sweat. I was crying because of my sense of failure. What was wrong with me that I could not do what I was being asked to? Sitting in front of this tree and failing at my first initiation task made my being different from everyone else even more painful and intolerable. For here I was being laughed at. Here I was caught in a lie. My feelings were a mixture of everything: aloneness, broken pride, anger, alienation, ostracism, segregation. Through my tears, I managed to continue keeping an eye on the tree. Then I suddenly began speaking to it, as if I had finally discovered that it had a life of its own. I told it all about my discontent and my sadness, and how I felt that it had abandoned me to the shame of lying and of being laughed at. I complained that my failure must have its roots in the fact that the spirit of my grandfather had defaulted from his duties toward me a long time ago. He had brought me here to be humiliated and thrown away like trash. I addressed grandfather, accusing him of standing between me and this tree and delaying my traditional education. I told him I did not deserve this and begged him to take me away if he could not allow me to have a normal education like everybody else in the camp. I then spoke to the tree again, not angrily, but respectfully. I told her that, after all, it was not her fault that I could not see, but mine. I simply lacked the ability. What I really needed to do was to come to terms with my own emptiness and lack of sight, because I knew she would always be there when I needed to use her to take a close look at my own shortcomings and inadequacies. My words were sincere. I felt them while I said them. My pain had receded somewhat, and I found I could now focus better on the tree. It was around mid-afternoon, but I was not really interested in the time. I had something more important to deal with, for suddenly there was a flash in my spirit like mild lightning, and a cool breeze ran down my spine and into the ground where I had been sitting for the past 1.5 days. My entire body felt cool. The sun, the forest, the elders, and I understood that I was in another reality, witnessing a miracle. All the trees around my yilla were glowing like fires or breathing lights. I felt weightless, as if I were at the center of a universe where everything was looking at me as if I were naked, weak, and innocent. For a moment, I experienced a deep fear that I imagined was similar to what one feels when one is told that death is inevitably on its way. Indeed, I thought I was dead. I thought that something must have happened while I was trying to reconcile myself to the shame of being caught in a lie. To substantiate my impression, I thought about the hardships of the day, the baking heat of the sun, and my sweat falling into my eyes and burning them like pepper. I had lost all sense of chronology. I told myself that this is what the world looked like when one had first expired. I felt as if I were being quite reasonable. I could still think and respond to sensations around me, but I was no longer experiencing the biting heat of the sun or my restless mind trying to keep busy or ignoring my assignment. Where I was now was just plain real. When I looked once more at the Yilla, I became aware that it was not a tree at all. How had I ever seen it as such? I do not know how this transformation occurred. Things were not happening logically, but as if this were a dream. Out of nowhere, in the place where the tree had stood, appeared a tall woman dressed in black from head to foot. She resembled a nun, although her outfit did not seem religious. Her tunic was silky and black as the night. She wore a veil over her face, but I could tell that behind this veil was an extremely beautiful and powerful entity. I could sense the intensity emanating from her, and that intensity exercised an irresistible magnetic pull. To give in to that pull was like drinking water after a day of wandering in the desert. My body felt like it was floating, as if I were a small child being lulled by a nurturing presence that was trying to calm me by singing soothing lullabies and rocking me rhythmically. I felt as if I were floating weightless in a small body of water. My eyes locked onto the lady in the veil, and the feeling of being drawn toward her increased. For a moment, I was overcome with shyness, uneasiness, and a feeling of inappropriateness, and I had to lower my eyes. When I looked again, she had lifted her veil, revealing an unearthly face. She was green, light green. Even her eyes were green, though very small and luminescent. She was smiling, and her teeth were the color of violet and had light emanating from them. The greenness in her had nothing to do with the color of her skin. She was green from the inside out, as if her body were filled with green fluid. I do not know how I knew this, but this green was the expression of immeasurable love. Never before had I felt so much love. I felt as if I had missed her all my life and was grateful to heaven for having finally released her back to me. We knew each other, but at the time I could not tell why, when, or how. I also could not tell the nature of our love. It was not romantic or filial. It was a love that surpassed any known classifications. Like two loved ones who had been apart for an unduly long period of time, we dashed toward each other and flung ourselves into each other's arms. The sensation of embracing her body blew my body into countless pieces, which became millions of conscious cells, all longing to reunite with the whole that was her. If they could not unite with her, it felt as if they could not live. Each one was adrift and in need of her to anchor itself back in place. There are no words to paint what it felt like to be in the hands of the green lady in the black veil. We exploded into each other in a cosmic contact that sent us floating adrift in the ether in countless intertwined forms. In the course of this baffling experience, I felt as if I were moving backward in time and forward in space. While she held me in her embrace, the green lady spoke to me for a long time in the softest voice that ever was. She was so much taller than I was that I felt like a small boy in her powerful arms. She placed her lips close to my left ear, and she spoke so softly and tenderly to me that nothing escaped my attention. I cried abundantly the whole time, not because what she told me was sad, but because every word produced an indescribable sensation of nostalgia and longing in me. Human beings are often unable to receive because we do not know what to ask for. We are sometimes unable to get what we need because we do not know what we want. If this was happiness that I felt, then no human could sustain this amount of well-being for even a day. He would have to be dead or changed into something capable of handling these unearthly feelings in order to live with them. The part in us that yearns for these kinds of feelings and experiences is not human. It does not know that it lives in a body that can withstand only a certain amount of this kind of experience at a time. If humans were to feel this way all the time, they would probably not be able to do anything other than shed tears of happiness for the rest of their lives, which in that case would be very short. Human beings never feel that they have enough of anything. Oftentimes what we say we want is real in words only. If we ever understood the genuine desires of our hearts at any given moment, we might reconsider the things we waste our energy pining for. If we could always get what we thought we wanted, we would quickly exhaust our weak arsenal of petty desires and discover with shame that all along we had been cheating ourselves. Love consumes its object voraciously. Consequently, we can only experience its shadow. Happiness does not last forever because we do not have the power to contain it. It has the appetite of a ferocious carnivore that has been starved for a long time. This is how much love and bliss and happiness there is in nature, in the place that was there before we existed in it. I cannot repeat the speech of the Green Lady. It lives in me because it enjoys the privilege of secrecy. For me to disclose it would be to dishonor and diminish it. The power of nature exists in its silence. Human words cannot encode meaning because human language has access only to the shadow of meaning. The speech of the Green Lady was intended to stay alive in silence, so let it be. I loosened my grip, lifted my wet face up to hers, and read departure in her eyes. I did not know where she was returning to, but wherever it was, I did not want her to go without me. My feelings for her were so strong, I felt that I would be able to brave anything to stay with her. Nor did I think there was any reason we should part after having been separated for so long. Her face, however, said I could not go where she was going, and that this was one of those imperatives that one had to respond to without negotiation. Things had to stay as they were. In despair, I clung harder to her soft body, unable to do anything else. My eyes closed as my grip tightened, and the soft body under my hands became rough. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was desperately hugging the yellow tree. It was the same as it had been before. Meanwhile, the elders had moved closer to me, obviously watching everything I had been doing. I heard one of them say, "They are always like this. First they resist and play dumb when there are a lot of things waiting to be done, and then when it happens, they won't let go either." Children are so full of contradictions. The very experience you rejected before with lies, you are now accepting without apology. This seemed to have been directed at me. I looked up at the elder who spoke. He met my eyes, and I felt no further need to be holding on to the tree. "Go find something to eat and make your bed for the night," he said gently. It was then I noticed that the sun had set. My experience had lasted several hours, but the time had felt so short. When I arrived back at the camping circle, the students were almost done making up their sleeping places. Nyangali, in his faithfulness, was discreetly waiting for me. He looked relieved when I appeared, so relieved that, for the first time since we had arrived at the camp, he spoke to me first. "You're still alive, Walleye?" "Yes, of course," I replied, feeling in the mood to chat. The day was challenging, but not too bad. "I feel you are gradually becoming a bush person. That will help a lot in the days to come." I don't know how to tell you this, but I've been afraid for you since the first day. Now I do not think I should worry anymore. I can see in your eyes that you are getting over to the other side. You were not there when you arrived. What is the other side? I inquired, feeling that I had learned nothing so far and that this might be my chance to satisfy my curiosity. When you arrived here, your sigh was out of you. That is dangerous for what we are doing here. You have to keep your sigh inside to make sure you can be pulled back to this side of reality after you've done your learning. Otherwise, your soul will forget that it is connected with your body and abandon you. Somebody must have done something to heal you today. You mean a medicine person performed a ceremony to fix me from a distance? I asked. But who? I knew what it meant when the sigh is out of a person. That person is prone to unnecessary pride and passion, loses his humility, and can't tolerate feeling vulnerable. I knew too that the only way this situation could be rectified was by performing a ceremony with a black chicken. When I returned from the seminary, my father had done this once without explaining to me what he was doing. After the ritual, he had told me that a foreknowledge of its function would have voided its effectiveness. I had never heard of this ceremony being done from a distance before, but obviously something in me had been strengthened and helped. It was getting dark, and my sleeping place had not been replenished. Nungli helped me change the leaves, and together we joined the rest of the group for the customary fire ceremony. Chapter 18. Returning to the Source. My experience of seeing the lady in the tree had worked a major change in the way I perceived things, as well as in my ability to respond to the diverse experiences that constituted my education in the open-air classroom of the bush. This change in perspective did not affect the logical, common sense part of my mind. Rather, it operated as an alternative way of being in the world that competed with my previous mind, set mostly acquired in the Jesuit seminary. My visual horizon had grown disproportionately. I was discovering that the eye is a machine that, even at its best, can still be improved, and that there is more to sight than just physical seeing. I began to understand that human sight creates its own obstacles, stops seeing where the general consensus says it should. But since my experience with the tree, I began to perceive that we are often watched at close distance by beings that we ourselves cannot see, and that when we do see these otherworldly beings, it is often only after they have given us permission to see further, and only after they have made some adjustment in themselves to preserve their integrity. And isn't it also true that there is something secret about everything and everybody? What we see in everyday life is not nature lying to us, but nature encoding reality in ways we can come to terms with under ordinary circumstances. Nature looks the way it looks because of the way we are. We could not live our whole lives on the ecstatic level of the sacred. Our senses would soon become exhausted, and the daily business of living would never get done. There does, however, come a time when one must learn to move between the two ways of seeing reality in order to become a whole person. Traditional education consists of three parts: enlargement of one's ability to see, destabilization of the body's habit of being bound to one plane of being, and the ability to voyage transdimensionally in return. Enlarging one's vision and abilities has nothing supernatural about it. Rather, it is natural to be a part of nature and to participate in a wider understanding of reality. Overcoming the fixity of the body is the hardest part of initiation. As with the seeing exercise, there is a lot of unconscious resistance taking place. There is also a great deal of fear to be overcome. One must travel to the other side of fear, crossing the great plains of terror and panic to arrive at the quiet one feels in the absence of fear. Only then does true transformation really begin to happen. It feels strange to not be afraid when one thinks one should be, but this is the condition for the voyage to other worlds. This metamorphosis cannot happen as long as the body is weighed down by heaviness. One must go through a process of relearning, enforcement of these lessons, and the consolidation of new knowledge. This kind of education is nothing less than a return to one's true self, that is, to the divine within us. After my intense experience with the Green Lady, I began to understand when it was useful to analyze what I was learning and when it was better to discontinue analysis. That night, when Nyanali and I joined the group for the fire ceremony, I knew the experience was going to be less traumatic than before. I had successfully reunited with the energy of the vegetable world. Its imprints were going to serve as the preparation for my next series of experiences. As the fire rose, chasing away the darkness within the circle, there was something especially magical in it tonight. As the darkness receded, I heard the fire speak to it, and I felt that tonight there was nothing violent or threatening about its gigantic, flaming proportions. One of the elders intoned a fire dance rhythm in a slow voice, while the elder in the center spoke. Fire is seeing, fire is dreaming, fire is living. He spat at it, and a flame jolted up Violet with a loud voice, as if it had been fed with gasoline. Satisfied with the result, the elder continued. Fire lives, and tonight is the night of fire, our own fire, within that burns like this one here. We must merge with this fire, be one with it, to let our dreams come alive. For in the belly of the fire rests our ancestral lives, and it is who we have always been, who we truly are, and who we must be now. While speaking, the old man walked slowly around the fire. Sometimes his voice rose in a crescendo, sending a chill into all of us. The drum followed every intonation of the elder's voice, as if he and the fire were one in delivering the message that the power of the fire was in all of us. Meanwhile, the flames appeared to have changed, moving through all the colors of the rainbow gradually, as if in response to what the elder was saying. We stood in a circle, hand in hand, somber. The silence was absolute. For a while, only three voices were heard: the voice of the fire responding to the voice of the elder, the sound of the elder speaking to the fire, and the voice of the drum. The last two voices were familiar part of the ordinary world, but the voice of the fire was getting stranger and stranger. As the elder spoke, the fire grew bigger and bigger, hotter and hotter. Yet suddenly a wave of cold enveloped all of us. First, I began shivering and noticed that everyone around me was too. I wanted to try to figure out how something that was so hot could be so cold, but I had no time for analysis. The elder was now inside the fire, walking in circles and speaking. In his hand, he held a hyena skull, all alight and burning with an unearthly fire. Each time the elder's voice rose higher in the air, the drum also rose in volume. The fire grew taller, and the skull became more luminescent, light breezing out of it. All of us had our concentration glued to the center of the circle, and it felt to me as if our combined attention were producing this phenomenon we were witnessing. Soon my hearing became confused and began to register strange noises. What I heard was almost like gibberish. Voices seemed to emanate from all over the place, but a lot of the ones behind me were coming closer and closer at an alarming rate. The elder's voice was getting more and more distant, the drum more timid, and the fire had no more center. It felt as if I were in the center of it, except that, instead of feeling hot, I felt very cold. The voices behind me were now in front of me. They belonged to people, red people just as real as I was. Some were tall and some were small, but there was no real fixity in their appearance. This crowd was gathered in an unusual place, a place that had no equivalent to anything I had seen before. The place where they stood seemed groundless. It appeared as a dark carpet surrounded with a multiplicity of stars, creating the illusion of a crowd standing in the middle of outer space. It felt like we were all floating together in the cosmos. None of the people present had any resemblance to any person I had ever encountered before on Earth. Yet the place was familiar, and I knew these people were the ones I belonged to. I was observing myself being the center of the unfolding drama. They all listened avidly as I, clothed in the most extravagant fashion, addressed them. Part of myself was an observer, and the other part was a busy actor in this drama, doing all the things he knew how to do well. On an altar in front of me were three baby girls. I did not know where their parents were, but I knew what my task was. I stretched my hands toward the altar and said something I could not hear. Suddenly, a light beam dropped onto the babies from an invisible ceiling and began rotating counterclockwise. It rotated slowly at first, then moved faster. All the while, the crowd prayed in a language I could understand then, but cannot remember now. After what seemed a long time, the babies and the altar rose up, encased in a planetary sphere. The planet, with the babies standing up in the middle of it, rolled away and then shot southward. I lowered my hands and brought them together, clasped over my chest, as if to give thanks to some divinity for a job well done. The crowd also bowed and gave thanks in their own language. The illumination of this scene, which seemed to have no source, disappeared, but I found I had expected that. As if pushed by an instinct that wanted to respond to these people's need, whatever it was, I tried to walk toward the crowd, but I could not get near them. A force field prevented this from happening. Each time I came close to it, I would be thrown back gently to where I had been before. Each time I touched the force field, an immense lightning bolt shot out, as if two high voltage wires had touched each other. Although this had no effect upon me, it had a tremendously powerful effect upon the crowd. 3 times I struck the force field, and each time the crowd went into a delirium of bliss. I began to wish I could share their bliss, but I had no more power over what I was doing to them than they had power to make me stop doing it. As I hit the force field for the 3rd time, I moved backward with my hands outstretched toward the crowd. I could see myself becoming smaller and smaller, as if an irresistible force were carrying me away from this throng of people whom I loved and who loved me. I could still see their countless hands outstretched toward me, as if in an ultimate appeal to bring me back, or to express their appreciation for the bliss that I had brought them. I watched myself fade away and back into the northern part of the circle around the fire, north, the place of water. My dream had lasted for a long time. A few of the others were already back from the dream world, but a whole lot more were still there. The latter included the elder in the center of the circle and the drummer, whose hand was now suspended in the midst of an uncompleted rhythm. He was most intriguing to look at. He appeared like a perfect sculpture carved out of the best ceremonial tree. Those still in the dream world were no less stiff in their appearance. Some had their eyes wide open, others had them closed. The latter were not frightening. The former were their eyes were projected out into the infinite. The abject depths into which they had plunged their sight could be shared with no one, nor could anyone disturb the intensity of their dream. Those who had their eyes closed were more earthly looking. One could imagine that they were either in prayer or simply sleeping. For a while, the whole circle of neophytes and elders stood at the edge between worlds. Some had crossed back to the narrow reality of this world. Others were refusing to return, at least for the moment. Suddenly, the elder in the center who had initiated the dream journey came back to himself. I saw him move his left hand and then blink his eyes. He took a deep breath and cleared his throat. Some of the other students immediately followed him. One of them muttered a slight yell of surprise, as if he did not believe in what he was being brought back to. A good third of the initiates were still dreaming fast, including the elder drummer. The old man in the center went over to his colleague and produced some ash. He sprinkled the drummer with the ash and uttered some words, and the drummer resumed his drumming. The drummer's return was strange. First, he completed his suspended rhythm. Then he started all over with a different, very syncopated rhythm to which he added some humming. He had a bad voice, And I thought to myself that it would have been better not to spoil the power of the drum speech with such a profane addition. In the dagger culture, the drum is a transportation device that carries the listener into other worlds. Only the sound of a drum has the power to help one travel in this specific way. This magic works only when the drummer coaxes special rhythms, not just banging noises, out of it. The journeys that can be taken with the drum concern not only the listener, but the drummer too. Where the sound chip goes, everybody goes. To refuse to drum is to refuse to travel. To forget how to drum is to forget how to feel. Presently, with the drummer's return to earth, there was a different dynamism within the circle. Those of us who were half here and half there completed our return. Some of the young men who had looked as if they were awake suddenly jolted into complete consciousness, fully realizing where they were. The elder in the center took care of those who had not yet come back. He said a few words to each one of them, spat on them, and as if by enchantment, they returned to life. Some came back rather reluctantly, as if they were being awakened from a great sleep that was still incomplete. These students mumbled some disapproving words and then obediently remained awake. Others, who obviously had not expected anyone to disturb them, screamed and jumped in surprise. They looked around, made a quick visual assessment of where they were, then sat quietly. For the most part, this waking up process was comical, but though everybody watched, no one laughed. By the time the last person was brought back to earth, the drummer had stopped, and we were prepared to listen. The elder spoke again. Our ancestors used to say that unless you return to the other world, you will not know the difference between there and here. You now know where you were before becoming part of this family of people. You know what you are doing, so you know what you came here to do. You know how good you were at doing things, so know how thorough you must be in trying to help others here. No one must tell anyone else where he went, what he saw, or what happened until the initiation is all over. This information is for you alone. It belongs to you. What you were taught in the other world should not leave the pit of consciousness in your belly, or you will lose it once again and have to search for it in the storms of everyday living. Do not let your tongue betray you. You will wish you had cut it off. What you've learned is like a fish who lives in the water. To speak it is to pull the fish out of the water. It will cease to breathe, and you will be both murderer and murdered. Our ancestors survived because they knew how to keep things unspoken. If you want to survive, then learn from their wisdom. This matter is now in your hands. Tonight, when you go to sleep, those of you who have not finished your task will have to leave your body to complete it. You are now able to tell where you are, who you are, and what you are doing. Now you understand that your body is a shell, and that when you are encased in that shell, there are only a limited number of things that can be done under these circumstances. You must get used to changing modes of awareness depending on what task you are being asked to perform. You must be alert to the way in which you are looking at things and know at any time the place from which you are looking at them. Your survival depends on this. In the days to come, you will confront situations similar to the ones you have already been through. Be able to recognize where you are, for if you fail, there is little that anyone can do for you. Here the old man paused. He walked over to the drummer and muttered something in his ear. Then he walked west and did the same thing to the elder who was posted there, and to the elders in the south and the north. When he was finished, he came back to the center, walked around the fire clockwise a few times, and resumed speaking. He no longer held a hyena's skull, but a walking stick. The dream world is real, he said. It's more real than what you are observing now. Why? I'm not going to give you the answer to this. I'll let you find out yourself. You are your own best evidence, your own best witness. But you must be aware that we have no knowledge or maps of the frontier between these worlds. So when one of you gets lost in one of them, Neither I nor any one of my colleagues can do anything to retrieve you. This boy will be denied death. You can't die in the dream world, and that's a terrible thing. But because you will be there with the body, you will suffer. It is horrible. We have a few of the tribe in there right now. They come to us while we are entranced to see if anyone has finally discovered the road back home. Please be vigilant. As much as we want you to know the secret of your nature, we do not want you to be damaged in the process. We want this to be an opportunity to repair the damage of forgetting already worked on you by your own growth. But we will be greatly grieved if any of you come to misfortune. The elder paused again. He seemed so human in the way he taught us caution. He radiated dignity, pride, and wisdom. But above all, it was his humility that stood out. I believed his words, even though I did not understand most of what he was saying. I could not help asking myself, however, what would be so terrible about remaining in one of those strange worlds. I knew from personal experience that each time I had gone somewhere unearthly, I had experienced sadness at the end of the journey, as if to return were to disconnect myself from something fundamental, something much more meaningful than the meaninglessness of the world here. The old man seemed to see this very pleasantness as one more reason not to linger too long, because we might then lose the option to return. Why was he insisting so strongly that we return? And why were these students who had lost the way back unhappy? Although up to this point we had left our bodies behind each time we had traveled interdimensionally, I knew that the experience we had just completed was meant to be a preparation for taking our bodies with us. I had traveled far in a body that was but a shadow of my real body, and I had returned. In the course of these journeys, I did not feel any different than I felt in the body I inhabited now. I slept badly that night. My consciousness was populated by a crowd of images. The green lady came back and spoke briefly to me again. She had news from some friends. She held a bundle of herbs in her green hand. "This will be your first medicine," she said. The eyes also appeared again. This time I was able to understand the message behind their blinking. They were no threat to me. They just wanted to talk. I winked my own eyes in response. When morning came, I still felt the same way I had when I went to bed. My body did not feel rested at all, but I could not tell whether I was merely tired or suffering from stress. The other students seemed in no better shape. Some were speaking aloud, and others were weeping violently. Perhaps they were completing the dreams they had started earlier. I listened to them for a while, trying to understand those who were talking, but they were speaking in tongues. I could not understand them, so I ignored them. Stay tuned for chapters 19 and 20. Peace, blessings, and much love to you all. On Earth, there was once a people who held the knowledge of the universe across space and time. They were the Israelites. Over time, their wisdom was scattered among all nations, with each taking a piece. In the end, this left them destitute. Now, listen to this profound wisdom passed down through great works, presented in your voice, from your own perspective, from the perspective of the Israelites themselves. For early access to chapters and full audiobooks, consider becoming a member. For just $10 per month, you can unlock exclusive access to this priceless wisdom, once stolen from our ancestors. Hear their voices through your own as you join us on this journey of discovery and reclamation.